Okay, everyone, let's get this webinar started today. Good morning, and welcome to WCEC's affiliate and partner webinar service. Today's webinar topic is Understanding Behavior to Maximize Energy Savings. Today's speaker is Kristin Heinemeier, a PhD researcher at the Western Cooling Efficiency Center at UC Davis. My name is Paul Fortunato, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Western Cooling Efficiency Center, and your host of today's show. Webinar. Starting to feel like it's NPR, sorry. These webinars are a service provided by WCEC to help inform and guide potential energy efficiency decisions for utility DSM programs and beyond. We at WCEC hope you find these webinars valuable, as they are only offered live to our affiliates and partners who support this research. To help ensure the information in these webinars remains relevant to you, our valued partners, I welcome any and all feedback, including topic recommendations. So please don't hesitate to call or email me with your ideas to enhance the value of these webinars. I will be providing a contact slide at the end of this webinar, so you may quickly get in touch with me or the featured speaker. As a nonprofit university-based research center, our main tenet is to educate and disseminate knowledge to the greater public. With that in mind, WCEC's latest newsletter is available to read at our website. This month's issue focuses on the different technologies employed at the Honda Smart Home in Davis, California. Also in this issue is an interview with one of the lead mechanical systems designer for the Honda Smart Home, Jonathan Woolley. Woolley discusses the strategies employed that went into the thermal management systems of the Honda house and how these technologies can be adopted for mass market use. To view the newsletter, please go to bit.ly/WCEC April 2014. If you have a question regarding today's presentation, you may ask it directly in the chat panel, or if you would like to speak to the presenter and the audience, you can request to be unmuted from the chat panel. I'll be monitoring the questions panel and will save these questions and ask them to our presenter in the order they appeared at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on May 29th. Our speaker for May will be Jonathan Woolley, Associate Engineer at the Western Cooling Efficiency Center. His topic is Climate-Appropriate Technologies. Where are we? This webinar will feature the results from many different evaporative technologies Woolley has both lab and field tested. I will be sending out the initial invitations for this webinar within the coming weeks. Again, today's webinar topic is Understanding Behavior to Maximize Energy Savings. And our speaker is Kristin Heinemeier, and I would like to introduce her right now. Kristin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me go ahead and change to your presentation.
Okay, we've also got a room full of people here that were in town and were interested in the talk, so they joining there, so I've got my studio audience to throw spitballs at me and make funny faces at me to try to get me to crack up, but I will not even look at them. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to be presenting here again. I've given one of these webinars, and it's always a very interesting group and lots of interesting questions and discussion, so I'm looking forward to it. I am going to be talking about understanding behavior to maximize energy savings. I will, well, I've got a slide that's got the overview. So page down? Or no?
Just hit the next
I'll let
button.
you do it.
Oh, sure.
So what I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit about behavioral research in general and what, the impacts that behavioral research can have on programs and product development and so forth. And the whole goal is to have behavior affecting energy use of the end user. And then the take that WCEC is taking on it is focusing really on middlemen. And I'll describe that in a few minutes. And then I'm going to give just a few examples of some of the research that we have ongoing now, a couple things that we've completed, a couple of things that we're in the midst of right now and some things that we're moving towards. And then I'll talk about the directions that I think we're going to be going with a lot of this research as we move forward. So, this is my muse for all this work. I wanted to, I started getting into behavior research for a particular reason. And I'm an engineer, and I've worked in energy efficiency stuff for over 25 years. And I have been doing a lot of work recently on maintenance programs. And lo and behold, my mother came to me and she said, "Oh, I've just signed a maintenance contract." And I was so fascinated by this. And so I probed her for lots of information. And every time a technician comes by, she calls me, and I go over there and I look over his shoulder. And so I asked her, "Why do you think you're doing this?" Because I wasn't absolutely sure she was really going to save money. And I'm always worried about her falling for scams and things like that. But she said, "No, I'm not doing it to save money. I'm doing it because I want someone to be there. If something's wrong with my system, I want to know that someone's there." You know, it was a peace of mind issue. It had nothing at all to do with saving energy. It had nothing to do with saving money. It was simply to have the peace of mind that somebody's on top of things. And so it started me thinking that there's probably a lot of decisions that people make that influence the energy efficiency of their HVAC is based on these kinds of issues. It's not necessarily based on, a life cycle cost analysis. It's definitely not based on that in most cases. And it's often not based on financial considerations at all, or, some of the maximizing comfort or something like that. That really isn't, I think, what drives a lot of people. So it got me interested in doing some behavioral work. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the end user behaviors that can save energy. And this I stole from a presentation. I can't remember, there's a white paper, and there was a presentation made, it was organized by the California Public Utilities Commission. And this was a paper that several people contributed to, and I thought was kind of a nice summary of some of the types of behaviors that one can do to save energy: changing your habits, investing in your home, automating your home, upgrading your home, things like that. So there's a wide array of behaviors that we can encourage that will save energy. This is stolen from I'm citing from another study. This is, I think, one of the first studies that looked really closely at what are all the opportunities for energy savings that an occupant has control over, and some of the kinds of things that they can do. It's kind of a nice way to lay it out. There's infrequent and frequent things. Obviously, the infrequent ones, it's a little bit easier to do an infrequent one because you only have to do it once and then you're done. The frequent ones you have to do every day. On the other hand, the infrequent ones tend to be the higher cost, more sort of investment type activities. So it helps to categorize things in terms of the frequency and the cost of the item. So based on some analysis that was done, I don't think there was any field research, but based on some analysis that was done, I think it was kind of a meta-study. They came up with a range of expected savings from a number of different end uses. And this is presumably a number of different behaviors that go into each one of these end uses. So you can see there's some pretty significant savings. I think I would bet that in a lot of cases the savings are even higher than this, because in a lot of cases, the systems aren't working correctly, or you've got your thermostat set on 72, 24 hours a day, whether you're there or not. There's huge waste in a lot of cases, and I think a lot of that waste can be eliminated through behavioral means. So my guess is that there's even more savings potential than this. And this just shows for residential, and I think there's a similar picture for commercial. This shows the way that WCEC has been looking at things, and this was supposed to be an animated slide, but somehow the animation got stripped out. So imagine the stuff on the right isn't there yet. We study technology primarily here at the Western Cooling Efficiency Center. To the extent that we think hard about people, it's usually things like user interface and comfort conditions. That's the goal of air conditioning, is to hit that sweet spot on the comfort chart. We expand that view of energy savings potential to include the end user, and then we start looking at issues such as psychology, sociology, physiology. If there's certain things you can do to affect thermal comfort, you need to look at physiology. So there's a lot of work that's gone into that sort of dyad, or the end user and interfacing with their technology. But the thing that we have been really intrigued by is this idea of middlemen. There's people that come in and they kind of intercede between the end user and their technology. Most end users don't really understand their technology. They don't know what the savings potentials are. They, like my mother, she just wanted to have someone who knew what was going on in the picture, and that brings up issues like accountability, competence, trust, and relationship. That's come up through really strongly in our research, is that trust and the relationship between the middleman and the end user is a really important issue. And I think there's a whole lot of behavioral work to be done on looking at this sort of triangle of influences. And of course, the situation is a lot more complicated than that. Middlemen is a broad category, and I stole this slide from Dale Gustafson, who's on the line now, so he caught me. This is a somewhat facetious view of the HVAC industry. The boxes are all real. The arrows are just going any which way, but there are a lot of different players in this industry, and they all, in our view, they all have a very strong role in influencing what an end user does regarding their HVAC. And one thing in particular with the contractors is that I'm particularly interested in contractors and technicians, because when an air conditioner goes out, the homeowner doesn't have the time to do a life cycle cost analysis and Google all kinds of different options and ask their neighbors what they have gotten, and it's possible the thing that they would want is on back order, or something may take several weeks to get there. They just take whatever happens to be on the truck or in the yard. So if you have a maintenance contract and there's a contractor or technician talking to the homeowner constantly, 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, they can kind of do some end-of-life planning. They can be discussing, I think this is going to last a bit longer. There's, if you get a new one, it'll be a lot more efficient. But I think this will last a little bit longer. What do you want to do? And they can make a plan, and they can do the research, and it would be much more of a planful process. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about looking at contractors and technicians, because I think they have a really strong role in energy efficiency. Because once that decision is made, that's it for the next 30 years, 20 to 30 years. That's the only opportunity to influence that decision, and the contractor and technician is there. So we have started an initiative called the HVAC Behavioral Research Initiative here at the Cooling Center, because people matter in HVAC performance. This is our team. I want to just introduce a few people. First of all, myself, I'm an engineer and a building scientist. you'll note that I have absolutely no behavioral training or social science research training, but I recognize good researchers when I see them. So we recently hired Sarah Outcolt, who has a background in behavioral economics and policy analysis. She comes to us from Rand Corporation, where she's done energy development projects for World Bank and among a lot of other things. Jennifer Kutzleb is a doctoral candidate in sociology. Marco Pritoni is a doctoral candidate in mechanical engineering. You may recognize his name from several papers on thermostats. He's been very involved in some of the work that LBL does on thermostats. Michael Lingenfelter is an MBA candidate, and he's a kind of an expert in entrepreneurship, and he's a consultant. And then Alan Meyer, who's, I was looking on his resume to see what his background is, and he's a chemist, but his PhD is in energy and resources, and I just call him an energy guy. Everybody knows Alan. So that's our team here, and as needed, we bring in other people from throughout the university. Of course, I have to give a thanks to our sponsors, the California utilities, the California policymakers, the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission, and then a couple of corporate sponsors. We've got Tokyo Gas and Toyota Info Technology Center has funded some of our work. So with that, I'm going to get into some of our research findings. We can't read it here, but hopefully you'll be able to read at least some of it. But this is a survey that we did of about 250 residential ratepayers in SCE territory. And we're trying to look at what their maintenance practices are and what their feeling is about maintenance, how important it is. And what we found, this is a question where we just asked them about their air conditioner, how they feel about their air conditioner. We asked them also how they feel about their lawnmower and their car and, a bunch of different things. And they didn't even know at this point that this survey had anything to do with energy or HVAC. But we asked them, to what extent do you feel that it is good, pleasant, beneficial, is the first three. Anything that's positive there means that they kind of endorse the positive statement there, and anything that's negative means that they more endorse the sort of negative statement. So I'll focus on the negatives. They say it's simple, it's boring, it's low maintenance, it wastes money, and it's low tech. That raised a lot of red flags for us because we were trying to encourage maintenance, and if someone says that it's low maintenance, it's going to be pretty hard to convince someone to spend a lot of money and go out and get it maintained when they think of it as low maintenance. This has really prompted a lot of our research looking into the fact that people see this as a commodity. They see HVAC as a commodity. They see it as a pretty uninteresting commodity. So there's very little that you could do to convince them to spend more on it because they just don't see the value in it. And so my belief is that if we can emphasize the sophistication of new systems, the sophistication of the technician services that are provided, they're looking at some very complex issues, and they're still thought of as a guy in a blue shirt that comes in a truck, and they don't really see it as a professional service. And I think that if we can emphasize that more, that we will get a lot more traction on a lot of different things in energy efficiency. This is just a summary of a study that we did where we looked at, we actually observed about 16 technicians. We called the contractor, asked them to come to our house and do some maintenance, and we observed them without telling them that they were being observed. After we kind of tagged along after them to see what they were doing and kept track of what they did and what they said. We had an engineer and a social scientist there keeping track of their respective set of things. And then we at the end, we told them, surprise, this is a research project. We paid for their services, and we gave them an incentive if they would sit for an interview with us at some point in the future. So we got a very warm response, actually. A lot of people were very interested in the study and what we were finding. And this summarizes our results. The y-axis is the number of tasks that they completed correctly, and this was judged by our technician, the sort of expert technician that we had working on the project. So, how many did they do correctly? And then we tried to correlate that with things like cost of the service, years of experience, those kinds of things. And nothing really seemed correlated at all except for service duration. So what this tells us is that you just can't do a really thorough maintenance job in less than an hour. Probably closer to 2 hours is what it takes to do a more thorough job. And that's a problem because the homeowner doesn't want to pay for, again, it's a commodity. I forgot to say when I was showing the air conditioner slide that the profile matched very closely to the profile of a refrigerator. So people don't think of this as something that they want to spend a lot of money on to get working perfectly. They just want it to work. So, customers are not typically willing to pay for these extended service calls. So that, I think, is the crux of the problem, that we need to these technicians, we interviewed them and they knew what they were talking about. They were actually, pretty bright, but they just were not, they didn't see it as part of their responsibility to do a really thorough job and to try to save energy. In fact, we asked them several times, what can we do to save energy? And most of them said something like, oh, you don't need to do that. Don't worry about that. You're fine. So we need to work on both the technician's expectation of what they're providing to the customer, as well as the customer's expectation of a sophisticated and valuable service. So one of the things that we're pursuing now is looking at the value of documentation of service provided. One of the things we noticed with the contractors was that they didn't do many measurements, but when they did do measurements, they didn't write them down, and they didn't use them to justify any of the things they were recommending. And it's our thinking that if they would, again, anything to raise the perceived sophistication of the service, to show here's the normal values and here's what I measured, and that's why I'm recommending this. I think that kind of, just the presence of a document like that will help to improve the perceived sophistication and hopefully the willingness of the owner to value and to pay for a more sophisticated service. The next one I'm going to talk about is the role of middlemen in emerging technologies. This is some work we're doing with Southern California Edison. I'm not going to go in detail in these slides, but just to show that there's a lot of decisions made by a lot of different people that affect how well adopted an emerging technology is and how well it's used. And we're doing interviews and surveys, some observation of a lot of these different categories of people. And we've identified a lot of different ways in which we think that our understanding of these these behaviors can improve the design and implementation of utility programs. Thanks, Paul. The one example I would give of this is something we're looking at now, which is economizers, which are kind of a chronic problem in commercial buildings. They almost never work right. The set points, which are really important to determining the energy savings. The set points are not set right typically. You see the pie chart, the D and C are not the right settings, but more than half of people have that setting. So we're looking at some emerging technologies and what's the behavior behind these choices. Next one I want to talk about, bleeding over here. Next one I want to talk about is some work that we're doing on zero net energy performance of households and the behavioral influences to them. We are actually situated at West Village. Some of you who have been here have seen it. It's a zero net energy mixed-use community here in Davis. The first floor of that building there is our offices, and then there's apartments up above. And I don't know how many people live here, several thousand. And it was a fairly traditional development, but they had the goal, because the university asked for it, they had the goal of making it a zero net energy facility. Oops. So we did a survey of about, I think, 150 occupants, and again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we asked them questions like, what kind of energy savings behaviors or actions have you taken, or do you typically take, and do you have any intention of doing any? And then we asked some questions about why and why not. We asked a lot of questions about the zero net energy aspect of the complex, and found that they really didn't understand the concept of zero net energy very well. A lot of them felt that because there was so much solar energy on the roof, they could use as much energy as they wanted because it was free. So there's a lot of education to do, a lot of potential behavioral interventions. PG&E is funding Architectural Energy Corporation to do some behavioral interventions and studies of that. Chris Hammer has been conducting those studies, and they've come up with some pretty decent savings on some competitions and feedback, reaching out to the high users. It turns out that the high users are using more than 3 times as much as the average user. So they're just reaching out to them and telling them, hey, you're a high user, has been helpful in getting them to change their behaviors. So we're hoping to do more studies of the residents at West Village. It's kind of thought of as a living lab. And in the same lines, we recently started a project with Tokyo Gas Company to look at an apartment complex that they built for some of their employees. And it's a very low energy apartment building. And they had the same finding that the highest users are several times higher than the average users. So they asked us to look into what are some of the reasons why they use more, and what can we do to encourage them to use less. So this is a project that we're just starting now. I think we'll be doing it in conjunction with some work at West Village, so we can do a little bit of compare and contrast. But the one thing I can say right off the board is that the folks in Japan use way less energy than we do for HVAC, just to begin with. They don't do really central heating or cooling. So it's going to be really hard to find ways to cut that back. But we're going to work on it. And finally, we just recently finished a field study of smart thermostats. The methodology is that we did a survey of occupants in 3 commercial sites in California. There was a golf course clubhouse, a small restaurant, and a parochial elementary school. We installed the thermostats. We had discussion boards so that we could reach out to them and ask them to do certain things, and then ask them for feedback to, as they're having issues with their thermostats, to let us know. and also give us feedback on how well it went doing this task that we asked them to do. We did pre- and post-monitoring of the energy use and the use of the thermostats, and then we did a post-survey of about the new thermostat. So we wanted to know, first of all, how do you feel about your old thermostat, and then how do you feel about your new thermostat? I'm going to show a little bit of data. This is temperatures and set points logged by the thermostat. You can see that one finding was that none of the people that we worked with changed the schedule at all. They did not change the schedule, even though they had a web interface and cell phone interface to do that. They just did not set it. One user did adjust the settings somewhat, and he ended up actually having negative savings because he was doing a really good job of thermostat management before. So there wasn't, this was basically implementing the schedule that he had from before. So there was no savings there. You can see in this chart that the user was setting the thermostat manually. When they come in the morning, they set it to what temperature they want, and then when they leave, they reset it. Not at all the way a smart thermostat is intended to be used, but that's what they did. And at the bottom line, the participants did not like the smart thermostat. They were angry, they felt more powerless, bewildered, frustrated, less comfortable, and feeling less in control. There was no significant energy savings, although this was a pretty small study, so anything we say isn't going to be significant, but very little impact on the energy use. The savings depended on the prior thermostat energy use, which I think is a big issue for smart thermostats, that the kind of people that are maybe early adopters are probably people that are doing a pretty good job to start with. So the savings from these early adopters may not be what we expect. And then finally, having smart defaults, the fact that nobody changed only one person changed the temperature. The thermostat did have a default schedule in there, but we made a little bit more aggressive schedule when we installed it. And I think it's really important what defaults the thermostat has, because it's likely that those will be carried on into operation. And then finally, there's been some discussion about utility. If they see that the set points are inefficient, going in and changing them. And I think, given this more powerless, more bewildered, more frustrated, I think that would not sell with a lot of customers to have the utility changing their set points. I think they would feel even less in control. So I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with smart thermostats, and I think for a certain subset of people, they're a really great technology. But our feeling is that it needs to be implemented in a careful way so that you provide some support and education to the user. And it may be that there are some kinds of users that want to feel more in control and probably are not going to be happy with the smart thermostat. Gives a couple examples of extremes in thermostat usability. There's the artificial intelligence in the smart thermostat. This is just showing Nest, but there are several smart thermostats. And then on the right is a picture from my church, and this system actually works really well. It's a really dumb thermostat and a timer, and the people can understand what's going on. They know when it's going to do what. It's kind of a pain because they have to get there early on Sunday morning to turn it on to warm up the church. I tried putting in a programmable thermostat, and it was an unmitigated disaster. Nobody trusted it. Everyone blamed me when it was cold on Christmas Eve, and that was all my fault. I think that there's a spectrum thermostat usability models, and I think different people probably appreciate different types of interfaces. So where are we going next? Among other things, we're looking more closely at residential HVAC. We're looking at this issue of thermostat usability extremes, this idea of, are there two types of users? And if there are, how do you identify, which type of user you're talking to or you're considering marketing to in your program or marketing your thermostats to? Things like we ask what their priority is, but we don't tend to ask how important that priority is. If they say, yes, comfort is my highest priority, and then you say, well, are you willing to spend, this many dollars to get it? Well, no, I'm not willing to do that. So I think that there are different ways to ask about priorities or to find out about people's priorities. The early adopters of things like that timer thermostat, are they just early adopters, or are they kind of the lunatic fringe that's really interested in energy efficiency? We need to understand these people, because our hypothesis is that there's a large number of people out there that really do want to save energy and can do it more easily with a more transparent thermostat. But that's not the market segment that people typically market to. So we want to understand how big is it and how sane are they. We want to compare with Japan. Again, they use so little energy because they don't have central heating and cooling. So there are things that we can learn from Japan in HVAC in the United States. One thing you'll find in Japan is that the thermal comfort is probably very low. They put up with it being cold or hot, and would that fly in the United States? I think most people are pretty used to it being the right temperature all the time, and I really don't know how, if it's a cultural thing that Americans could get. There could be a scenario in which an American would be willing to accept that. I don't really know. Defining and testing engagement strategies. How do you encourage people to use these thermostats and use them in an energy-saving way? We're planning to do a pilot test in the city of Davis, hopefully working along with Cool Davis, a local community-based organization here in Davis. And then closely related to that is task and passive cooling, again, comparing with Japan. We think of the house as like a big cooler with all the air inside at exactly the same temperature, but in Japan, there's an overall, that should be task and ambient cooling, typo there. Task and ambient cooling, there's an overall temperature, and then there's a temperature where you're at right now. And we think that there's some potential for developing those further. The user needs to either understand the dynamics or at least know when to make a change, when to open windows or close windows or turn on fans, when to turn on the air conditioner. It takes a little bit more thought. We're considering developing some technology to recommend a mode based on the conditions inside and outside. And we're also looking at defining and testing engagement strategies and pilot testing this at West Village and potentially also in Japan. So what do these two have in common? They're both technical and behavioral work. In both cases, I think the baseline of behaviors and attitudes isn't well understood. There's a lot of information we need to collect on how do people use their thermostats? Do they tweak them all the time, or do they just kind of set it and forget it? Are there different types of people that kind of cluster into certain behaviors? How does an attitude about climate change affect what they do with their thermostat? I think we just don't know a lot of things about these topics. So we need to do surveys of usability, acceptability, and attitudes, and development and test of user engagement strategies. We need to look at smart defaults and how to implement that in an intelligent way. And looking at the gradient of temperatures in time and or space. So, if the temperature varies around in different rooms or different places in a room, or it, if it's cold when you get home from work, but then it warms up, you get a nice blast of warm air and to give you confidence that you're going to be warm, and then it gradually heats up. So I think, all these things are related to technology to support the individual finding their own balance between thermal comfort and energy efficiency based on their priorities and motivations. I think that kind of captures what a direction that we're hoping to go in. Just a few pictures to support this. Task ambient heating and cooling doesn't have to be a bad thing. The whole idea of the hearth, that it's maybe chilly in the house and your family gathers around the hearth is certainly a lovely image. The oasis, finding a spot where you can be really cool when all the rest of the house is warm. These are all concepts that are described really well in a book by Lisa Heschong called Thermal Delight in Architecture. I think that, more vernacular architecture tends to utilize these things, and I think that they would save energy, and looking at the acceptability of these kinds of things is would be an interesting research approach. This shows a couple other examples of task and ambient conditioning. The ceiling fan, I'm a really big proponent of ceiling fans in certain climates. But people need to know how to use them. They need to know that the set point can be changed to save some energy while they're using the fan. And then on the right is I assume it's a traditional form of heating in a Japanese home, but I think they're still building homes with this in it. And there's a table, and you sit under the table. It's got a futon over it, and it's got an electrical heater. So the family kind of gathers there and plays games or whatever it is that they do, and they're relatively warm. So these are the kinds of things that we're interested in looking at. Oh, and my animation is really important here. Can I move this? No, I can't. Okay. We'll send out the slides, I think, and you can see the quote that's underneath. There was a speech. I'm old enough to remember this speech Jimmy Carter gave at the height of the oil crisis in 1979. He showed up, like you see on the right, wearing a sweater and sitting in front of a fireplace, and said actually I was looking back at the text of it, and actually it was a pretty good speech. It was kind of, showed a lot of leadership and inspiration, and I think the quote that's there says something about, doing this is an act of patriotism. But I don't think anyone remembers the text of his speech. The main thing they remember is his sweater. And that sweater is now in the Carter Library or Museum or something like that. And it's been kind of a symbol of what we don't want to ask people to do in conservation, that at all costs we avoid asking people to be uncomfortable. Jimmy Carter was kind of mocked for this. And I think that we need to kind of revisit, how do people get comfortable in spaces with minimum energy, and, what kinds of actions are people willing to take in order to do that. So look at that. With that, I guess we've got a little bit of time for some questions or discussion. There's a lady right there getting locally comfortable. She looks very happy.
It's not you.
It's not me.
Big deal.
Okay, Dale's asking, WCEC is doing this, that WCEC is doing this is encouraging, that the IOUs are funding it is encouraging. That said, what provisions, plans exist for putting what you are teaming to work in ratepayer-funded programs? You know, we are funded by the emerging technologies groups in some of the utilities, and the goal is to provide intelligence that we can use to improve the ratepayer-funded programs. So the findings of this will make their way into these ratepayer-funded programs and hopefully help to make them more effective or help the uptake of the programs. I think that you know, the more you get into behavioral work, the less people think that it's a real thing, you know, because it's not a widget. So it has a tendency not to be trusted. I think there's plenty of evidence that, you know, that these behavioral effects are real and they can be counted on. If you do it correctly, they can be counted on. And I think the Public Utilities Commission and the IOUs are getting to the point where they're understanding that and are willing to consider including some of these more behavioral interventions in ratepayer-funded programs. But you're right that it's you know, it is slow to come. Other questions? It was the perfect speech, no questions. I must have said everything perfectly. Daryl says, thank you, Kristin. I hope to hear more in the near future.
Okay, find out where it's from.
Yeah, we had a question from Dale Gustafson again. Honeywell and probably others like commercial programmable thermostats use more sophisticated temperature control algorithms than the old T87 round. These more advanced protocols improve comfort and save energy when the AC is running. Would a setup such as your church, but using modern control algorithms and a slicker-looking timer be a good idea? The conclusion that we kind of drew was that I don't think that a slicker-looking timer would have been a benefit at my church. I think when they saw it, they kind of had a sense of skepticism about it. And I think, you know, that probably is a familiar theme in, you know, with other kinds of thermostats as well and in other types of settings that, you know, you just want to know exactly what it's doing. You don't want to, with the thermostat field test that we did, the users were often very bewildered. They would, in fact, one of the rooftop units wasn't working, but they didn't notice it for a very long time because the user just kind of put up with it. They thought, oh, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. I guess this is energy efficiency. You know, they had no idea why it was doing what it was doing. And, you know, I think that you can do a lot with user interface to help people to see, you know, to understand what's going on and to give them a sense of control over it. But again, not everybody wants that. A lot of people do not want to see that. So, you know, I think there are different types of people, and you would have different types of interfaces for those different types of people. Okay, Mark Lowry asks, it sounds like homeowners would benefit from not only a thorough introduction to their thermostat by the contractor or technician, but perhaps a follow-up training reinforcement as well. I completely agree with that. One of the things that we concluded was that there's you know, the deployment model is really important. In a lot of cases, if the thermostat wasn't, you know, they didn't know what to do and they didn't know who to call. They always ended up calling us, but you know, we encouraged them to talk to the thermostat manufacturer or to their contractor. But the thermostat manufacturer isn't really prepared to, you know, get out in the field and help people figure out what's going on with their thermostat. And the contractor really, you know, installing a thermostat is a pretty low priority item. They install it, they walk away, they don't ever expect to come back. So we think that there's a need for a more hand-holding in the process of installing and configuring and then operating the thermostats. Okay, Lee Hamilton, what time is it? Lee Hamilton says, as smart thermostat technology advances and customers become more engaged, is that a stretch? Do you see more savings potential in the residential sector or small and medium building customers like the ones you piloted? I think probably more in residential sector, but I think there are different issues in between residential and commercial. I think in small and medium buildings you have a lot of kind of optimization of a lot of different people maybe using the same thermostat, and how do you sort of deal with all those different interests? There's still the usability issues. I think my sense is it's more in residential, but I could be wrong. I think that they're both. There are real problems, I would say, in thermostat use in both environments. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kristin. Thanks, everyone. This webinar is actually being recorded, and if you would like a copy of it, please send me an email or call me directly, and I'll make sure you have it. I will be posting all of our webinars online with a month lag time, so to give our affiliates a better, more of the current webinars before it goes back out to the public. So with that, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.